When I'm writing code, I use code snippets a lot. For example, creating auto properties, constructors, for each loops, and more are all done with a very few keystrokes. That saves me a lot of time, but sometimes I find the code I'm writing still includes repetition. For instance, I type out console.readline manually because there isn't a snippet for it like there is for console writeline. In this video, we're going to look at how easy it is to create our own code snippets to make our development even faster. We'll learn how to optimize our environment to become faster and more consistent in our coding. Before we proceed, I do want to point out that in the description, there are links to get my source code for this video, to sign up for my mailing list, to join Patreon, and to get access to my courses. I recently launched an all-access pass to my training content. For just $50 per month, you can gain access to over $1,000 in training resources, with more being added all the time. If you're serious about taking your career to the next level, that's a killer deal. Don't miss out. Now, if you haven't come across me before, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. One of the ways I do that is by teaching context. There are a lot of tutorials out there that teach you what to do. I go a few steps beyond that to show you when to do it, why you should or should not do it, what pitfalls to avoid, and what the best practices are. Basically, I get you ready for the real world. If that's the type of training you're interested in, subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell icon to be notified when I release new videos. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have some downloadable samples for you, but we're not going to have necessarily C# code. Okay, so we are going to go to Visual Studio, and I'm going to create a quick ASP.NET core project just to have something to work with. Okay, but all of our code you'll get in the download, that's down in the description, all that code will be snippet files essentially. The cool thing is, if you like the snippets I create, you can just import them directly in your Visual Studio and not have to do anything. They'll just work. Now, if you want to tweak them a little bit, you can also do that. So let's start. Right now I'm saying C# Windows console. Let's clear all and start over. I want C# and I want the web. And that gives me ASP.NET Core web application. That's fine. And this is just, now you gotta name it. This is just to have some C# context and HTML context to see these snippets. So web application is fine. We'll hit create. And this is one of the very, very few times you'll see me create a file. It's like number 12 at the end of it. That's just for throwaway projects that I do that. Okay. Otherwise, name everything well. Okay. So let's go over to, that doesn't really matter. Program.cs is fine. Now, in here, I can do CW and hit tab twice. And that types out console.writeline and puts my cursor in between the brackets. Really helpful little stuff there. Okay, now let's get rid of this just because I hate seeing this green. So that gets rid of that, or that makes that really nice. But if I were to say, console readline like CR, I can't do that. There's no snippet for it. So I have to say console.readline. Now, obviously, in a web project, I'm not using the console, but this is just, again, a C# place to type stuff. But how can I create something that will allow me to type this out quickly, just like I type out CW? Also, if you're in a class, you can do CTOR, that's constructor, and tab twice, and it creates a constructor for this class. Also, if you see create properties, I type prop and tab twice, and there's an auto property. I can type string and then tab, and it goes over to my property and it highlights it, and I can say test. I can enter, and so it's very, very quick to create these properties with just some really quick keystrokes. You're not typing out public and then string and then the value and then curly brace and get and semicolon. You're not typing all this out because this is repetition right here. This stuff is repetition. It's just you need the type and you need the name. That's all you need. It's even easier when you have a prop full, because that creates the private backing field, which names the types the same thing. So if I said string and tab twice, now that's named string or typed a string. If I were to say this is test like that and tab, now notice down here it says test. So there's some really cool stuff it does. So that's what, and if you've seen any of my development, you've probably seen me use a snippet in probably almost every video I've made, because snippets are just really, really helpful. They make me type things out fast. So let's learn how to create our own snippets. Like I said, they're not that hard to do, but it's not really designed to do it in Visual Studio, which I find a little interesting. I do think there's room there for someone to create some type of extension for Visual Studio that allows you to create snippets easily. There is one or two extensions in Visual Studio that will allow you to do snippets, but I haven't found great success with them. I've seen some pretty concerning things in the comments about what they do. I just didn't want to go there and use one of those extensions. I want to show you how to do it yourself. And then, hey, maybe if you're a little ambitious, you could create your own extension and then share it with all of us. All right, so let's create a snippet. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. And the reason I'm using Visual Studio Code is because it's really great at creating whatever file you want and just giving you some IntelliSense for, or not IntelliSense, but some coloring and those type of things. So it's a pretty powerful little text editor. So I'm currently in a folder. I believe it's my D demos snippets folder. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to name this, let's call it readline.snippet. And that .snippet is the name of the extension to give snippets. Okay, it's a .snippet. So this is going to be a readline snippet. So what we're going to do is, let's go back to Visual Studio. I want to create console readline as a snippet, right? So I'm going to say, if I type out CR and tab twice, I should get a console read line. Just like if I type CW and tab twice, I get a console write line. So let's go back to VSCode, and I'm going to paste in here a template. Now, I'm giving you this template, so that's part of the downloads. And this template, what it is it lays out for us a little bit of the structure for how a snippet is formatted, okay? So let's talk through what this is, okay? So first of all, it's an XML file, which I'm not a huge fan of XML files, but it is what it is. Now let's see if we can get that a little bigger first. There we go. So it's an XML file, leave that alone. It starts off with code snippets, plural, and then it has the structure for that, leave that alone. Code snippet format 1.0.0, leave that alone. Then you have header and you have snippet. All right, so the header, I've got a title, an author, a description, and a shortcut. You only need the title. You don't need the other three. So the title is just a friendly name you give it. So console read line. Let's call it console read line, like that. Not even C# code, just the friendly name. And author, Tim Corey. Description, creates a console.read line statement. Okay, and our shortcut. This again is optional. However, if you don't give a shortcut, what happens is you have to go to the snippets menu. So if I go back to Visual Studio real quick, if I wanted to insert a snippet here, I could go to Tools and Snippet Manager, I believe, and then you have to find it. Let's see, this is in C#, and let's go with Visual C#, and CW. And I can say that's the one I want, I believe, something like that. Nope, that's not it. You see how often I do this. Let's right click. Oh, there you go. So snippet. Insert snippet. And then you go and find that snippet. So you look down here and say, Visual C#. And then, I probably CW. Double click that. And there we go. That's a pain. Who wants to do that? We just want snippets to be fast. That's the whole point of them. If they're slow, there's no reason to have them. So let's go back over here. We want to have a shortcut. So CR for console read line. All right. That way, this is what we're going to type out. And as long as there's not a duplicate, so make sure you're not stepping on toes of an already existing snippet. So go through the list and look. But if there's not already one, you can use it. Now, I said go to the list and look. There's a couple ways of doing that, but an easy way of doing that, if you're on a blank line, go to Control J. And then down here at the bottom, there's all these different filters. Okay, and the last filter is Show Only Snippets, also known as Alt-T. Click that. Here's all your snippets. So if you're thinking CR for console read line, notice in this list I have CTOR, CW, CO. So there's no CR here. So class, checked. Those are all the C's in general. Okay, so I can use CR. So I got console read line, and that's all the header information. So I got my title, my author, my description, and my shortcut. Again, you don't need anything but title, but I would include all of this stuff just for the sake of completeness. Now, the snippet, the very first thing you need to know, the thing that's most important here is this code language equals, and there's a couple of double quotes. You need to put C# here. And that's for C# snippets, obviously. But if you don't put that inside the quotes, then it won't know that it's a C# snippet. While we're here, let's go ahead and change the format. Sorry, I've been doing plain text. There's XML. Sounds better. So now it knows it's XML. Cool. A little better coloring there. That's one of the reasons why I was using VSCode and I forgot to turn it on. So code language equals C#. So that's important to have what the type is there. And I'll talk through how you can find the different types or what those different types are. Now, typically you're going to be creating C# snippets, but I'm going to show you in one of my examples today, we'll actually create an HTML snippet. So we won't use C#, we use HTML instead. So you can't just say, oh, it's always C#. Now, the final piece for this basic template, and we're going to expand upon this with some more options, but this one's just a basic one, is this right here. It looks kind of weird. So you have the opening angle bracket, then you have an exclamation point, then you have a square bracket, then you have C data, and then you have an open and close square brackets right here. Inside of this open and close square brackets is where you paste your code. So in my case, it's going to be console.readLine. Make sure you get the casing correct. I'm going to include a semicolon at the end. So this is the C# code that you want to be inserted into your code when you type out the shortcut. Now, one of the things that we're going to get into in a future snippet is the fact that you don't control the spacing or the formatting of this data. You can say, okay, this is one line, this is the next line, this is the next line, but you can't say, okay, this is how far you want it, tab and dent. It's going to conform to the style preferences of the Visual Studio that it's inserting it into, right? So you can't impose your own formatting guidelines on your snippet. That gets imposed by the person who's putting it in, all right? So in this case, we only have one line, so it's not a big deal, but you'll see multi-lines. It looks kind of ugly in here, but it works. All right, this is all there is to a snippet. That's it. I filled in the header information with just some basic information. I said C# for the language type, and I pasted in my code in between the square brackets. Done. I'm going to hit save on this. And now I'm going to do is go back over to Visual Studio. And I'm going to say Tools, Code Snippet Manager. And in a language C#, I'm going to say Import. And I'm going to choose D:/demos/snippets. And in here is the readline.snippet. I select that and hit open. And it's going to pop up this and say, okay, where do you want to put this snippet? And I can put it in multiple places. but the options I have, you want it in my code snippets. That's probably the best place to put it. You can put it in multiple if you wanted to, but I don't see a need for it. We're just going to put it in my code snippets. Hit finish and hit OK. Well, first before we do, notice in my code snippets, there's now console read line. If I select that, it shows me, first of all, the name is console read line with those spaces in there. That's the title. The description is right over here. The shortcut to use is right here, and who authored it is right here. So you see all the information. So if you didn't have it, that'd be a blank gray space over here. Also note, if you wanted to see this to actually, let's say, remove this from your snippets or to modify it, the location, when you select it, is right here. So there's the full path, including the name. So I could grab just this path, I could copy it, I could paste it into File Explorer, go right there, and let's say delete this snippet or modify it. Now, if you re-imported something with the same name, what it will do is say, do you want to overwrite? And yes, you can overwrite that way as well. So you don't have to go there in order to edit, but that's one way of doing it. Another way is just to re-import the same thing and overwrite it. All right, now I'm not going to restart Visual Studio. I'm just going to hit OK. And now my cursor is here. I'm going to say CR tab tab, and there's console read line. All right, so CR tab tab, console read line. All right, so you have your console read lines. Now notice when I put it on its own line, it gives it a line in between. That's actually the formatting of Visual Studio, my particular formatting. But if I were to say string test equals CR tab tab, it doesn't put a new line. So now it's going to read from console read line into the test variable. So I can even do this in line. So I don't have to do it on its own line. But this way now, when I create a new console app, even without hitting the new line character, I can say CR tab tab. There we go. Now I'm going to do console. Oops. It's going to go fast, but I did it wrong. You know, CW tab tab. Hello world. Like so. So really quickly I can get off the ground with a console application. Now maybe you don't want to do a console read line, but maybe you want to do something else. Like, have you ever seen this? Where at the top of a file, you do the documentation, like so, and you say, well, let's just fill it out. Let's start with title, and then you have author, and you have date, and then you have purpose, and then after that you have revisions, and then maybe you space in a couple, and you say, well, the first one will be like this kind of format. And then something like that, where in every file you have this type of format where a person fills in all this information when they create a file. That way you know what's in the file. And then you track those revisions using these type of entries in the code comments. Now, probably most, this stuff you don't need to do anymore because of source control. You can actually look back through and see the code comments for the commits. I'm sorry, not code comments, the commit comments when you commit the code for this particular file. So you'd see what those are. You don't need to do that. But all the rest of this stuff is probably pretty relevant. So let's even make this just the relevant stuff here. So title, author, date, and purpose. So you know who created it, when they created it, what the purpose was, and what the title of it is. Maybe you don't need all this, but maybe you do. If you have this type of format, so we're just going to pretend we do, you create a snippet for this. So let's do this. Let's go over to VSCode. We're going to create a new snippet. Let's call this the header. Let's call it header doc.snippet. And again, we'll format that as XAML. Oops, move my mouse. There we go. So let's paste in the empty template, and we'll say this is a documentation. So file documentation, call it that. Author is Tim Corey. So if I were to keep this this snippet template, I'd probably modify it to always say Tim Corey, because it's, again, one less step. The description, and here's a tricky bit. You can actually create a snippet to create this template. So you can actually do that in VS Code, which I'm not going to show you today, but you can create a VS Code snippet to create a snippet file for Visual Studio Snippets. So it's kind of that inception layer of snippets. So this is creates a documentation header for a file. That's fine for description. Shortcut. How about docme for document me? Language. It's actually still C#, even though it's documentation. Now let's go back and copy that multi-line. I'm going to copy this. And now I'm going to paste it between the square brackets. And yes, that looks horrible, but it's actually fine. Let's hit save. That's all I'm going to do. Now I have a snippet. I can go back to Visual Studio. I can come over to my tools, and I can go to Snippet Manager, import, and it never remembers where I want to go. That kind of frustrates me. Demos, snippets. And this is the header doc. And yes, just my code snippets is fine. Hit finish, hit OK. And now let's get rid of this like it was never there. I'm going to type out doc me, or just doc, because there's only one doc here, but tab twice. There we go. There's our snippet. Okay, so really quick to create these little snippets. So if you have something repetitive, this is the working with Visual Studio equivalent of dry. Don't repeat yourself. If you're repeating yourself over and over, creating these things, maybe you're copying it from somewhere else and pasting it in here. Instead of doing that, create a snippet and then just quickly tab it out. All right, so type docme, hit tab, and it will fill it out. Now, we can probably do a little better with this because we can fill in the author. We can have a space here for title and author, and you can tab through kind of like you do with auto properties, where you fill out the type and then you tab to fill out the name. We could do something like that. We could even fill in the date automatically, probably, but we're not going to do that with our header. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the next snippet, which is actually an HTML snippet. So let's go to our pages and go to our index page. And on our index page, let's just say we have an input form. Now, how do you do form? Well, you say form, and then you say the action equals, nope, that's not it. Method equals post. See, I even forget this. And you're like, okay, so how do I do a bootstrap for form? And so you go to getbootstrap.com and you figure it out, and you come back and say, okay, I'm gonna copy this and paste it in, and then I'll modify it from there. Well, I actually did that. So that's right from the Bootstrap documentation. And let's just put that method back in. And then I can go from here, okay, form group and email address. I can fill in this, or I can change this to an ASP-4 and fill it in. But I have my basic structure I work from. Well, why are we going out to the documentation and doing this and then making our modifications every single time? Because I don't create forms enough to just do it out of my own head. Okay, I don't remember the syntax for the divs and the form groups and the smalls and all the rest. What we could do is make this into a snippet. So let's go over to VS Code. We'll create a new snippet, and we're going to call this snippet, let's just call it sample form.snippet. And again, we'll set this to XAML as the type, and we're going to paste in that same basic structure. We'll say this is let's just go with sample form. The author, guess who? And the description, a sample form to use as a starting point. How about that? Shortcut, sample form. Okay, it's a little long, but at the same time, I probably don't have to type sample or SAMP, and it'll probably be enough. Now I could go look, but we're going to assume that that's fine. I'm pretty sure it is. Language, this is not C#, it's HTML. All right, so don't get those too confused. Let's go back over to Visual Studio. I'm going to copy this. I can tweak it if I wanted to. If I wanted to change things like I add the method equals post. But I think this is good. I think this is all I need. So let's go back to VSCode. And inside of square braces or square brackets, I paste. Again, doesn't look great. Does have some tabbing in here. That's okay. But it's not going to keep that tabbing the same way if my VS or my Visual Studio environment is different. So if I had 2 spaces instead of 4 for a tab, then it would space it 2 spaces for every tab. Just to prove that, let's just get rid of some of this white space. All right, so there's now no white space in any of these. All right, and that's fine. I'll hit save. And now go back over to here, and I can say Tools. And let's go to Code Snippet Manager. The tricky bit here is change the language from C# to HTML. And then say Import. And again, I forgot my location, so Demos and Snippets. And this is my sample form snippet. And I want to import it just into my HTML snippets. It's fine. I hit Finish, and I hit OK. Now let's get rid of our form. And I'm not going to paste it in. And just to show you I'm not doing a redo or something like that, let's go to my privacy page. Totally different page. I can't redo it. I'm going to type in let's do Control J first. That brings up IntelliSense to make it a little easier. So I have to SAMPL, and then I'll get the sample form. Okay? And I tab twice. There's my sample form. And notice the tabbing is based upon what Visual Studio likes. So therefore I get the 4 spaces for every tab, which quite frankly is a little excessive, but it makes for nice, clean viewing for demos. All right, so now I have a snippet for creating this form. I can then just start modifying. So really quickly, if I want to drop a form somewhere, I say sample form, tab twice, actually tab once for that case, since I typed the whole thing. So if I didn't type the whole thing, I just type SAMPL. Nope. Control J, SAMPL, and tab twice. HTML is a little trickier because of IntelliSense is just a bit different there. It's also a bit different in WPF, but this will work there as well, which is really cool because WPF has some cases where I type things over and over and over again. You can create snippets for those and just make your life a whole lot easier with XAML snippets. All right, so there's our HTML snippet. So really quickly to get up and running on a new form, doing it that way. So there's a couple of snippets, but we haven't really touched on probably the most, I'd say, confusing one, which is if you go back to programs.cs, if we were here and I type like prop and tab twice, notice how I'm highlighting int, I can type string and tab over to my property and type test. I can tab back to string and say, no, it's an int, and tab again. I hit enter and it's done. That's a little more complicated. Well, kind of. It's not horrible. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new snippet. And what this snippet's for is if we're inside of, let's go to the index page code behind, or the page model, and let's ask for an I configuration. All right, control dot, and let's say config, control dot to create and initialize that field. All right, so this config, we can say underscore config dot get value and say, okay, it's a string value, and that string is test colon my test, something like that. Then go to the end, put a semicolon. Okay, that gets a value out of the app settings.json, a value in the test, and then inside there, was it my test? Okay, so it's going to get this value right here. So it's going to get this string based upon test colon my test. Well, that's a lot to type out and remember. Let's make our lives a little easier. We're going to create a snippet for just this. But we're going to do replacements for this string type because it might not be a string. It might be an int or a bool or something else. And we're going to do a replacement for where it comes from in the app settings.json file or in whatever config file you're using. So let's go over to VS Code. And I'm going to create a new snippet. So new snippet. And we're going to call this, let's call this config file.snippet. And again, we'll change this to XML just for, that's a formatting thing. That's not to do with saying this is an XML file. It's just saying we're going to format this as an XML file. I'm not changing it so all snippets are XML files by default as far as recognized as that. I could do that in VS Code, but I'll leave it like this for now. All right, so with this, let's zoom in a little bit. We can actually close this down too. All right, so it's a little bigger. But let's fill in the title information first. Get config value. How about that? And guess who? Tim Corey. And the description is creates a statement to load a value from the iConfiguration source. All right. And our shortcut for this is CFG_val. So configuration value. I don't think that's in the list. Let's go back and make sure. So we're going to come over here and we'll type out Control-J and then filter by snippets and just look for configuration value. I don't even see a CFG. There's no CFs here at all. So I could just do a CFG, but I think CFG_val is good because what can happen is maybe I want later to have a different configuration snippet, like connection string. So you can have a config.get connection string, and then you can say, okay, there's a connection string name. So I might have a snippet for that, which is not a huge amount of typing there, but maybe. So I'll leave it open for that by making sure I don't lock myself into just CFG. For now, I can type CFG because that's going to pop up in IntelliSense and get me the CFG_val by default. But if I have CFG CNN, then I can have CFG_V and CFG_C would be my, all I have to type out before I can hit tab twice. So just a note, just don't use CFG because again, it's too short and you might have other things that are also configuration. So the language, C#. The data, well, let's go back over to Visual Studio. I don't want to free type this. So let's just grab our whole snippet right here. I'm going to include the semicolon at the end. No, you know what? I'm not going to. I debated this because if I include it, then I can't put this inside of a value. So for example, if I have if test equals config get.get value, it put a semicolon at the end, which is not right. And I don't have to modify my snippet code to undo something that my snippet does. So let's not include a semicolon at the end. So let's go back over to VS Code. I'm going to paste it in between the square brackets. There we go. But this has string in it, and it has test colon my test in it. So let's do replacements for this. So outside of this code section, but before the end of the snippet, what you want to do is you want to add a declaration. Plural, sorry, declarations. I always like to end it before I go back in and put stuff inside of it. And inside here, we're going to create a literal. And again, let's close that out. Now I'm going to put stuff inside a literal. And a literal, that's going to be your variable, the thing you replace. Okay? And you have two options. You have a literal and you have an object. Now you can read the documentation and be confused, as most of us are as you read the documentation for what an object versus literal is. In general, you can use literal for almost everything, if not everything. Okay? It makes life easy to use a literal. It's just easy to use. An object has to be something that exists outside of your snippet that you can reference. So for example, we're going to use this type here, string. You could say, okay, that's an object, not a literal. And you could say, okay, that has to be a system.type. All right, and kind of restrict it to that. We're not going to go there because I don't think for 95% of your cases you will need it. In general, even for string, you can use a literal. It'll be just fine. So I just want to show you that just so you're not a little confused as to what that is. Okay, so we're using literals for everything here. First thing we need is an ID, all caps. And inside the ID, we're going to give it this is like the variable name, the replacement name. So let's call this val type. I could just call it type, but I wanted to make sure you knew this was not some kind of C# thing. This is not a reserved keyword. This is a word that I made up. That's why I'm calling it val type. I'm going to copy that. And where it says string, I'm going to replace that with $val type $. So this is where this will get replaced with the value for this literal, which we're going to have a tooltip and a default value. So let's start with our default value. And this default is going to be what's in here to start with and what you leave in here. So for example, I type prop, I believe the default type is int. So if I don't type anything for the type, I can just tab over to the name it, and I'm done. So if I type prop, tab, I can tab off the int to the name and say ID, and I'm done. Because the default is int. Well, the default here, let's make the default string, because that's probably the most common value you get out of our app settings.json file, is a string. You can get other values, but that's the most common one, so make that the default. And then finally, we're going to add a tooltip. You don't have to do this. You can say leave it alone, but I think we want to have a tooltip just to say what this is. So the data type of the value from the config file. All right, so that describes what this is. So there's our literal. We have our ID, which is the variable name. Let's say that. And you put that inside of $signs in your code. Now note, you can put that in multiple places in your code. So you can have val type somewhere else as well, and it will fill in all of them based upon the value for one of them. Now next, you have your default value. This is what this will be when you first create the snippet if you don't change it. And then the tooltip will tell the user what this should be. That's kind of like a little bit of a help. All right. Now I want a second variable, so I'm going to copy this literal section here. I'm going to paste it right below. So now I have two literals. Notice I have to change my ID, but I can't have two IDs the same. Let's call this just path. And we're going to put it inside the double quotes. $path, $. So the double quotes will be there. We don't have to have somebody retype those because they have to be there. It's not like you can say, well, sometimes we don't need double quotes. So therefore, I'm going to put my value inside the double quotes, so there's one less thing to type. So the default value for this, let's just say values colon test. And why do I use this? Well, values is something that can be pretty common in app settings.json files. But really what I'm doing here is I'm showing you that this is how you get a value that's nested. Now remember in my app settings.json file, let's go back to that. Where are we here? Right there. So I have this value, then I have an object. Inside there I have properties. I sometimes forget how to access this property. Is it dash? Is it, brackets? What is it? Well, this way it demonstrates for me, oh yeah, it's colon. So it's just a little way to help me with that one thing I forget is to do that. You could just put an empty value here, or you could put a value of just test or value. That'd be fine. But this helps me remember how to access things multiple levels deep by using colons. All right, and again, let's change the tooltip because you don't want the same tooltip. The path to the value in the config file. All right, I'm going to save that. So now I have just a little snippet, just this one line, but I have two variables that get replaced in that one line. And of course, my header information as well. Now I can go back to Visual Studio and let's do our tools, Code Snippet Manager. We want to go back to C#. We want to import, go back to d:\demos/snippets. And this time I want the config file snippet. I double click on that. I want it just in my code snippets and hit finish, hit OK. And now if I'm in my index file, let's get rid of this. And I say, you know what? I really want to have a value from my app settings. And maybe it's in test colon my test. So I would say, what was my snippet again? CFG val, tab a couple times. There you go. String. So actually it's an int, and I tab, and what was it? Test colon my test. I hit enter. I'm at the end. Now I put my semicolon, good to go. So now obviously I'd be putting this, like that or something like that. But now, whoops, not string. But now I can get that snippet very easily. So if I have a Boolean is alive equals CF tab twice, it's a bool, and it is values colon is alive. You see how fast I typed that out? Most of this work was repetitive. I just needed to know the type and the name in the app settings.json file, and everything else gets filled out for me. It's just that little bit of speed increase by being able to just fill out what you need, and the rest of the structure gets done for you. Now, the really cool thing here is that since you can create your own snippets so easily, this can work for your code and for the way you do code. I've worked for organizations that had those documentation files. So doc me, and you're good to go. I've done this a lot in my .NET Core code. So create a snippet for it. I don't know how many times I've done the console read line. Well, now I can do that. Just these little things that make me go faster, but it's me particularly. Maybe you don't type console read line ever because you never use consoles, in which case you're probably not practicing what you learn, because console is a great way to practice what you learn. Just a little plug there. But if you do things differently, or your organization has maybe some certain structures you put in place for classes, or whatever it is, you can create a snippet for that and then make your life easier. Maybe it's an entire class that you lay out with, there's a standard section for properties, another section for constructor, and all the rest. And you create these structures all the time with your setup code. Well, put all that setup code in a snippet, and then just a couple of keystrokes, tab, fill in the relevant spots, and you're done. This can save you, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute per time. Think of that over the course of your application development. If that's saving you even a minute a day, that adds up. You're talking an hour a year of your time that you're saving. And it's probably going to save you more than a minute a day a lot of times. So when I'm in consoles, this console right line, the CW tab, I do that all the time. That saves me probably 5 seconds every single time. And I do it 50 or 100 or 200 times in a console app. That adds up really quickly. When you get in areas like XAML, where there's a lot of fiddly bits to type out and you're doing some of the same structures, for example, all the time I create the grid.column definitions and grid.row definitions, and it seems to take forever. And I fill it all out once, and then I copy and paste the row definitions, the column definitions. Well, what if I just typed a couple of keystrokes and had the structure in place for a couple rows and a couple columns, and then I can just copy and paste if I need more. Or maybe I have 4 rows and 4 columns, and I delete the ones I don't want. There's so many ways to make life easier with just these little snippets. All right. So I encourage you to think through what are areas where you might make your life better and create a snippet for it. Better yet, tell us. Now, don't post the entire snippet, okay? But just tell us in the comments what you made a snippet for. All right. If you try and paste code or paste links to code, that often gets blocked by YouTube. I have to go in and see if I can find the comment in the spam or the junk filters if it even gets there. And I have to unblock it and all the rest. So don't post code and don't post links, please. But tell us what you did to make your life easier. What code improvements you made just by this. Now, this isn't just a speed thing. This is also a formatting thing. Because if it's the same format, the same way every time, you're consistent. This spot up here, this is now consistent. It will always be this way. You won't find that somebody put, the date up top, like, well, that's ugly, but something like that. Okay? Which is just a little bit off from everybody else. But it's all the information, just a little bit off. Nope. Same snippet, same way every time. Once you get the snippets the way you want it, you can share it between your team members. And now everyone's on the same page and you're all getting faster and faster in your development cycle. You're worrying less about the repetitive stuff and you're working on the stuff that's different, that dry principle, even in your programming. Okay? So these are snippets. I would definitely encourage you to try them out and get used to them, make your own, and let us know which ones you did. All right? Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.